Hello, I am Carrie Gard, and welcome to Tea Time with Tech Marketing Leaders. Welcome back to the show. As always, we are live, which means if you're here with us, say hello. The beauty of being live is we get to answer your questions in real time. And if you aren't able to join us live, that's okay too. That's the beauty of recording. It's here for your viewing pleasure when it is a good time for you to watch. And we will be paying attention to the comments asynchronously and getting you answers at that time as well. So don't panic. If you're not here with us in live, we will be sure to circle back with you. We are here for the engagement. I mean, the beauty of LinkedIn. Am I right? Yeah.
That's right, Carrie.
I am so excited for this show. I have Bethany Ibarra here with me. We are going to unpack why pipeline is the process. A little bit about Bethany before we dive into our topic today. Bethany is an accomplished executive with over 25 years of experience in driving revenue growth and maximizing profitability across diverse industries, including technology, engineering, and manufacturing. I want to pause there for a second. The reason why I host this show is because we are all in the same boat of trying to market a very hard thing to message. You can't do it in a one-liner. This isn't like Nike of just do it. It requires thought and integrity around what it is we're trying to help people understand of how we make their jobs easier. And it's so hard to do well. And we're messaging it to an audience that doesn't necessarily want to be messaged to. So partnering those two things together is a tough, hard nut to crack. And Bethany is here for us in that she's got this experience in spades when we're talking about technology, engineering, and manufacturing. She has clearly been around the block, folks, so lean on in. She has a proven track record of success at leading companies like Motorola, Google, and Lenovo. Spearheaded the development of scalable commercial domain at an engineering consultancy while focusing on strategic planning and client lifecycle optimization to deliver sustainable growth. Expertise in enterprise leadership, P&L management, new market launches, and building high-impact strategic partnerships. She's a collaborative leader with a continuous improvement mindset, adept at driving organizational design and talent development initiatives. Bethany, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Carrie. That was humbling, but I appreciate the intro. Yeah, I'll give some context about who I am. First off, thank you for having me on your show. My origin story is born and raised in Michigan, and I was raised by a single mom, a few children, two of my brothers. So my childhood was informed by a deep love of education. My mom was an elementary school teacher. Lifelong learning is something that I don't just believe in. It is part of who I am and always want to sing from the rooftops and profess the power of curiosity quotient, juxtaposed with the ground shifting a lot underneath my feet, as a, income level that just hovered around poverty and understanding the value of work and what that means. And also understanding the need to always attempt to infuse stability to create that sustainable traction in your life. And that led me out of undergrad to a wonderful growing up at Motorola. 15 years working across the business life cycle in a few different divisions, really getting that trifecta of government, commercial, industrial, and consumer, working there both domestically and internationally, from a startup division to a very established market leading division, and even being part of a sunset of a division. So just getting that incredible and grateful for that experience. And then at Google a few years where I had already moved into commercial leadership. That was when I got to manage my first really sizable P&L of over 100 million annually by the second year. And then moved over to Lenovo through an acquisition and worked there for 5 years as a general manager, relaunching North America and a couple channels. And then that led me to engineering consultancy, where I've been the last couple of years building out a commercial domain. So I'm excited to talk about why frameworks and processes infuse kind of this repeatable growth. So I'll pause there and then we'll set up some context.
Yes. I have some questions because what an amazing journey you've been on. And not everyone, including myself, it took me multiple years of coaching to finally pull that thread through of how our upbringing impacts our leadership. And so the fact that you have that story figured out is pretty amazing from the curiosity and education standpoint to the stability standpoint. Like, what more could you want from a CRO? Like, seriously, folks, the stability piece is huge, but then always figuring out where that next opportunity of growth is going to come from and learning and the figure it outer. I'm a figure it outer, and I appreciate those. My mom was also a teacher and instilled in me the love of learning. To this day, I consider myself a forever student because of her. So I so appreciate that aspect, and especially the stability piece of it as well. Having, a different, an upbringing of where, parents are divorced and living cross country and needing that as a child as well. Like, that stability is so huge. And it totally comes through in my work, and I appreciate why it comes through for you too.
Own your story. That's what I tell everyone. It's not about perfection. That's okay. It's part of what makes you you and part of what allows you to thrive when you own that story.
Own your story, know your story, and then own it and appreciate it's part of why you are the way that you are and who you are. I love that. I absolutely love that. And the other thing you said that really stuck with me of the curiosity quotient. So how do you use curiosity? I'm going to ask this question and we'll get more into my standard, but I just love this. So how do you apply curiosity today in the work and job that you do?
So the early beginnings of my career, why was I doing a lot of laterals, quite frankly, across divisions to get that bulk of experience? That hunger to understand the different ways industries and businesses and markets function, and getting that foundation underneath you, asking a lot of informed questions. And by the way, people want to help answer those questions. So I encourage everyone at any point in their career, reaching out, asking colleagues. Certainly everyone talks about having mentors, but mentors can be peppered throughout your life, peppered throughout your work. It can be someone in your faith community that works in a certain industry. So, asking a lot of questions. Of course, formal education gets layered in there. I did go and get my MBA. I'm always working on certifications. That is important to continue to keep those skills fresh. I listen to a lot of podcasts, different perspective, different ideas on different takes. And I will say, being at a consultancy the last couple of years, and this is what people talk about when they have worked at consultancies, nothing can replace a database of knowledge of talking to 10, 15 different companies, solving sometimes similar problems with a lot of patterns, but from a different perspective every week. And that can just elevate and escalate your ability to lift up, but then go down and help drive value.
Seeing patterns is definitely key in our line of work, for sure. One thing you mentioned was, I'm sorry, I'm totally breaking the rules because I did say we were going to move on. 2 more questions, 2 more, and then I promise we will. Lateral moves. I think this is something people lose sight of. They get stuck on this idea of moving up in a ladder and needing that financial stability, which is absolutely key. And I understand, but there's still ways I moved laterally and I actually still made more money when I was doing that. I don't know if that was the same for you, Bethany, but my mom now works for Apple in the education division. And one of the things that she got from one of her mentors is to look at growth as a jungle gym and to not think of it as this straight upwards momentum, but how can you move through and without? So having had that experience, what did you take, what is a lateral move meant for you? And to your point that you just made, like, what are some of those key patterns that you found in each jump?
Yeah, I love this topic. So I think of my career as a portfolio. You know, artists have a portfolio and it demonstrates the stretch that he or she may have. And thinking about opportunities, being open to them. So I was explaining this to a group one time. You know, you're on a journey in your career, and your career is actually quite long. You know, there's this expression, life is short. Okay, well, decades is not short. You know, it is a marathon. Some of it's run at a sprint pace, but it is a marathon. And when you are traveling to a foreign country on vacation, you're needing to be open to what's possible. You need to know, okay, I have to pack my toiletries. I have to have my passport. You know, you have to have some preparation to not be left on the side of the street, but being open to what's possible. You know, that has really informed my career, and being open to that and jumping, especially earlier in my career, on those opportunities. And I agree with you. If it's done in a somewhat purposeful way by being open-minded, it didn't mean for me, and it shouldn't mean making the same for those numbers of years that you're doing that, because you're still able to amplify your outcomes as you're curating this experience. You know, just because it's a title lateral, you're still able to be more powerful because you've had an operations role and now you're in product management. You still have that work experience in your back pocket. You can still pull from it. You still have connections that you've made that are useful and powerful to your results.
There's this intersectionality that happens depending on what journey you've been in. So that's the beauty of marketing and its expanse. I would say product marketing and sales, right? There's this huge expanse of a journey you can go on in terms of what path you choose, whether it's a specific niche from a channel perspective, whether it's going more broad from going in-house and more of a manager level to, like I said, sales or product. There's so many different avenues that you can take within marketing. And then the cross section that you just mentioned, Bethany, I think is so key around what makes you unique in your ability to forward your own path. For me, I started out in traditional marketing, and then I did a lateral move and actually took a step back into digital. And then my next job was a promotion, and a jump, but I got that promotion in moving companies because of both my traditional and digital experience, and having managed a huge account on my own. Yes. And then I sat there, and in that job, they needed help with from a finance standpoint. And I was able to take that on to help them find a better way to create their billing system. And I actually uncovered 250 grand for the agency. So now I have this finance background partnered with the digital media background that made me really be able to forge my own path forward and get to my next job and a huge salary increase, right? So I made sort of these lateral moves like you're talking about, with some salary increases and some titles here or there, but it was that intersectionality of the finance piece and the digital marketing planning piece that really propelled me. And so find the things that give you joy and that you love and that you're putting energy behind. Wasn't thrown in the finance piece and I was like, okay, fine, I'll figure it out. I was like, oh, I love this. I was nerded out real hard in the Excel sheets, and I figured out the system and the process, and I figured out how to streamline it. I dialed it in, right? But I loved doing it. And so whatever your path is, to Bethany's point, I cannot agree more on taking the time to figure out that intersectionality for you. And
you don't have to have it all figured out. And what you're describing it'll come is common. And when you create that collection, that diversity of experience, those powers that you have wrapped around you, the force multiplication of career growth does start to happen pretty fast. Once you've really curated a book of knowledge, you'll see then you have that ability to run both sides of the marketing spectrum. You have the ability to run a larger P&L that has diverse markets and channels. That will take much longer if you're just working your way through one domain over time. There's not one path, there's not one recipe, but certainly be open to the opportunity.
I know the job market's hard out there, and hopefully this gives you some inspiration. I love that. Last question, and then I promise we'll get into the crux of our conversation. You said something around informed questions, and I know that this is going to impact our conversation. So I just want to be thoughtful here around what that means for you. What does it mean to not just ask questions for the sake of asking them, but how do you, what does informed questions mean in your book?
So thinking about the why of your job, if you are in digital marketing, if your why is you're managing an agency and you're buying AdWords, understanding the metrics in a deeper, richer way. Maybe that you're a little bit more junior and you have questions. Where can you go to find that source of knowledge? If you are new in sales and you're managing, lead intake, what do you mean by ban, budget, authority, need, timing? What are the nuances there? Finding people that can help, and don't just ask one subject matter expert. That's where the power is. Ask a collection of people. People want to help. They want to share their knowledge. Most people, of course, timing it, scheduling it, finding that space. But that is something that at organizations or even outside your own virtual or actual walls of your organization, people want to be helpful.
I love that. I love the aspect of asking multiple people, trust but verify, right? Mm-hmm. So how do other people see this situation? It's why on my podcast, if somebody comes on and I've talked about the topic already, I'm like, that's okay. That's fine. I want to hear your perspective and your take and how you approach it, because it's going to be different. It's going to be different thanks to the intersectionalities of our career. And so I want to hear it. And I'm here for it. I love this. Bethany, I could literally talk to you all day about all of these things. We were literally having the podcast before we started having the podcast. I was like, we need to go live, Bethany. This is too good. This is too good. So thank you all for joining us. We are going to talk about why pipeline is the process. That's 5 now. I said it. I got 2 more. I'm allowed to say it 2 more times. I'm excited for that. But pipeline is the process. Talk to me about process, Bethany. And as a CRO, right? So we're talking about the many levels of marketing here, and the CRO plays such a critical role. We're going to take a step back. The CRO plays such a critical role. Tell us about that role first, and then we'll talk about how process fits into it.
Sure. So the mission is to generate revenue for your organization in sustainable ways, in repeatable ways, in ways that allow for growth in the context of what that means to your company, your industry. That's a wide range of variants. So understanding what you do, who you do it for, what those metrics are that you're measured against does vary, but that is at the simplistic level what your mission is, to create sustainable ways to drive value to your customers, to your target markets that generates revenue in a repeatable way.
Let's talk about the value piece, because I feel like we don't all quite have a handle on what that means. Yeah. Value means different things to different people. So from your perspective, how do you show up and create value for your customers?
Yeah, that's a perfect tee-in. And this is some of the context of what we're going to get into. So contextually, knowing your product market fit, your PMF as it's called, is important to what we're about to talk about. It's actually required. That is a living, breathing organism that evolves as the market shifts and changes, as your business matures and grows. But understanding the current state of that and then the journey of that along the way is mandatory. So I describe it as knowing what you're doing, why you're doing it, and who you're doing it for, the A to B to the C. So what am I doing? Am I offering computing power to manufacturers? That would be a value driver. What am I doing? Am I ensuring on-time delivery of restaurant equipment to large restaurant chains? That tells me what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and who I'm doing it for. So your product market fit. in addition to not just your product market fit, understanding who your ideal client profile is also required. Your ICP, as it's termed, it's a standard industry term. Being able to just sell your restaurant equipment to every small business in the universe, that is a recipe for low profitability and not sustainable. Understanding that your distribution company is optimally profitable when you can find that big chain of Long John Silver's and Olive Garden, and you're serving them at the wholesale level. Really being able to tag and attribute not just who I'm doing it for in the universe of possibility, but what does ideal look like? And then you're able to identify your customer lifetime value, your CLV, as it's termed in the world. And that is varied. I've worked in, the government side of the business when I was at Motorola, a client lifetime value of a customer who buys a network and mobile devices that were purpose-built for their network over 10 years is dramatically different than an engineering services firm that's developing a product over the course of, a year and a half to 2 years. But, understanding your business in that context, all of that is assumed when you're starting to create a framework around your pipeline or your qualification process of your business.
We talked about value in two ways, and I want to be really pedantic and sort of annoying about it, but I think it'll be really helpful as we lay the ground here, because generally in marketing, when we talk about giving value, we talk about it from a customer standpoint, which you mentioned. So one is about giving value to our customers. What is it that they're getting that's going to make their jobs easier, and who are we giving it to? Two very important pieces in the PMF, product market fit. But the other thing you mentioned on the flip side is the value that brings back into the company, the CLV, which is the value for the organization from a numbers standpoint. Did I capture both of those?
Perfectly. Absolutely. Understanding, and this is the role of revenue leadership, is that marriage of the value that you're delivering to the market, to your target customers. Who are they? Why do they need to solve the problems that you're solving? And how can you reach them? And then what does that pull back into your company? It's the marriage of those two things.
It seems so duh, but also simpler than it actually is. So let's break these two things down. There's three things you mentioned in terms of giving value back to the market: the product market fit, which is changing why you started it today is not what it becomes tomorrow. I think to an extent, I'm curious about this, Bethany, because one of the things I always try and go back to when I'm working with, I feel like startups tend to lose this really quickly, and I try and always bring them back of like, but why did you start it? What was the pain point you were having that you were trying to solve? So instead of us trying to take in all these inputs of like what other people want and the features that they are looking for, let's focus on the pain that you were feeling and why you started. So in terms of the value we're bringing to the customer and the initial journey that this thing starts on, am I right to assume that that's really where it begins, and then you take in the customer input as you build out from the MVP? Or does it always come back to, or do you need to take in those inputs? Am I giving my customers bad advice? Maybe I am, and that's okay too. Like, where's the balance in that in terms of finding that product market fit? I feel like you got to find that balance to get the thing off the ground.
Yeah. I mean, you have to start to get moving. I mean, you have to get off the starting line to get some points on the board. And, being stuck in discovery mode for perpetuity. And I've only worked in technology, analysis paralysis. Technology companies love data. I certainly do as well. But, what are we really trying to do here? Are we just trying to analyze something? Are we trying to deliver value to the market, the world, and solve problems? The latter. So voice of the customer is what you're describing, and peppering that throughout your existence as a company, not losing sight of that. But certainly as you're defining your initial instantiation of your company, that is required. And, trusting your instinct, to your point of what the advisement that you're giving these startups, there was a reason why this business became a business. Even though you're a startup, there is a valid reason why you're solving a better way to grow organic plants. You're solving a better way to compute a certain algorithm. There's a reason that had validity. So you're right, getting lost in the sauce. And you do see a lot of startups, they call it the pivot, and there is nothing wrong with being open to that, but you can get lost in the forest and never find your way out if you're not clear, starting with the end in mind, the Franklin Covey values, starting with the end in mind. What does that mean? What really is your end goal, and not losing sight of that.
Let's talk about it from the flip side of the enterprise standpoint, because you've worked with many big companies from Motorola to Lenovo. From that standpoint of reconnecting with the customer, because we've all lost our way. Let's admit it. Can't help it. It's happened. Move on. How do you find your way back to the customer and the customer voice, again, with so much data at your fingertips, so many customers to navigate? How do you not get lost in that sauce?
And to add another layer of complexity, and this gets to, why frameworks are so helpful, the multi-layered value chain within those businesses. You're many steps removed sometimes from the end user or the actual customer using the mobile device or using the Bluetooth accessory or using the Nest, thermostat in Google hardware. You can be 3 steps removed. Now, certainly, dashboards and data and analytics behind how these millions of customers are using the products, that informs features and capabilities, but it can get cleansed out of your process when you're that far removed. And you have, in this complex selling process known as enterprise selling, sometimes you can have your buyer of record and you are the vendor of record with a distributor or a retailer. That's not the actual procurer of your product. That's not your installed base. They are buying your product wholesale. And it is important to understand the value chain that they need delivered. What are their pain points? How can you help alleviate them? As an example, when I manage national retail, returns just kill that business. The retail space, whether it's online or brick and mortar, consumer returns are such a heavy burden of cost. How can we help support the reverberation and, pre-owned sales, thinking about force multiplying value, even for your channel partners, is, part of driving value. Where are you driving value? Everywhere. When you are responsible for revenue, it's not just about, one piece of the equation. That's when you're doing it right. It's thinking about delivering value every step of the way, every step of the value chain.
God, it feels so big. You mentioned frameworks being a huge component of helping navigate this huge ecosystem in terms of being able to deliver that value in multiple ways across so many channels. The reseller channel load and then field marketing and all of those, we were talking from a global standpoint, it gets very diluted very quickly. And so let's break down the framework. What's your favorite? Where do you start? And how do you really marry these two things in terms of value for the customer and then value back into the company?
So you understand the job to be done, as it's called, your product market fit, the why and the what, into who that you're bringing to the world. You understand your ideal client profile. You've attributed that. And you understand financially, what is that, approximation of a customer lifetime value for your company. So now you're armed with that information. Setting up a qualification framework is extremely important. It creates a vocabulary around the types of opportunities in your pipeline or this multi-phase qualification step. Depending on the business, it could be anywhere from 4 to 6 steps. It depends on how they organize it. But it's simply put the journey that your customers take with your company's help on aligning on the value, aligning on delivering that value, and then retaining it. If you're in a SaaS company with a subscription-based model, that could be setting it up for years initially, and then hopefully renewing it for additional number of years. And a little more transactional capital equipment, it's big, heavy expenditures, but buying a bulldozer could be, buying one a year, Nevertheless, there is a journey that you go through with all these opportunities in your funnel. So one thing that is extremely helpful is to set up a scoring system. Not complicated, no more than ideally 2, but 3 scoring levels per attribute. Because if once it gets too complicated, first of all, no one understands it. So what's the point? But even if they're trying to, you'll see this big variance in the users inputting the numbers, and then it loses value. So you really want to
maintain too. And you have more
maintain
than 2 or 3. Gosh, I feel like that would fall apart really quickly.
So that is super, super helpful to create some way you are scoring. That helps with prioritization. We're all limited by capacity. There's an opportunity cost to even talking about opportunities, right? That alone, if you're inputting inefficient deals into your process, you only have so many people in a given day to qualify, to show demos, to go on trips, to build relationships. There's only so much ability to manage all of that in a given time. Some businesses do this better than others, but certainly the more attention you put into that, the more efficient you'll be with your outcomes.
I feel like for all the companies I've worked with, from a qualification standpoint, from a scoring standpoint, it's very arbitrary. And everybody has a different idea on what scoring looks like. So let's be kind of annoying and pedantic about this, Bethany, because to your point, you don't want to overcomplicate it, but what does that even mean? It's so hard to not overcomplicate it when you have multiple ICPs you're going after, depending on what products you saw for your audience. And then you're talking about account-based marketing. So you have multiple audiences based off of who you're talking to, depending on what level they are. You have your enterprise to your mid-size to your small businesses. Right? We're already slicing and dicing this to the nth degree. And then you build in your channels to that, and who gets the score at the end of the day, right? So let's break this down for folks. We're going back to the ICP. From everything I feel like I just said, sort of talking myself into this, it's got to come back to your priority of who is that ideal buyer, right? Who is buying from you? Who is paying for this thing? And what do they look like? Is that as simple as it gets?
And there can be multiple definitions. If you're, running a software as a service business and you're selling CRMs, customer relationship management databases, the chief revenue officer may have multiple teams targeting different pieces of the market, and each of those teams think about their client lifetime value and their ICP a little differently, but at the aggregate there's still one macro ideal. So I like 3 different scores. An initial lead score, which can be it could be in most businesses even automated. It could be just scraping the internet for size of the company and putting tolerance ranges, number of employees, understanding if they have even this division named this that could buy our product. It could be very, very high level, and that hopefully can be as automated as possible on the lead scoring side. Then there is some manual manipulation once you start engaging with human beings and you go through this journey of aligning on value. The sales process in enterprise selling is not short. averages 12 plus months for most industries. That is not one conversation or even 10. That is a journey you're on together, building trust, delivering value along the way, and learning more about their pain points and how you can help solve them in a really clear way. So the lead score in that pipeline process or the sales qualification journey, I like to think about it 3 different ways. Financial, ability to pay. If you're dealing with a lot of private companies, this is not a slam dunk. If you're dealing with a lot of publicly traded companies, you could scrape that off the internet and automate it. Done. But in a lot of worlds that we work within, private companies, their financial statements aren't just on the internet for anyone to read. This is different than desirability to pay, which you will not learn until they become a customer. And this is not necessarily correlated to, how much cash they have on hand. Some companies just honor this and some don't. We can get into that, the psychology, the why, there's reasons. But certainly, if you are selling to diverse target markets, really understanding, are they funded? How many seed rounds do they have? The less, the bigger the risk it is to ingest that into this long process that you are consuming your finite human capital and company resources to try to align on. Then what I weight the most is, the sales projections. And this gets to the client lifetime value, both short-term and long-term. And these numbers throughout this journey get crystallized. You're not going to know truly what the financial opportunity is after a 30-minute discovery call. That's very unrealistic. So that's okay. Having a leadership team that's aware of that, that's a process. And then timing, are they ready to buy? And that there's tolerance ranges around that. What is, a near-term amount? It could be within 6 months. That's where we're going to spend our effort. If they think they need to buy within 6 months, if they start to say things like, this is going to be a strategic initiative in 2026, pump the brakes, once again, how are we being most efficient with our time? Doesn't mean that we, never call them back. It means there's an appropriate way in which we can engage with someone who's thinking that long lens versus near term. And then finally, this is around product market fit. And this will vary by company. And you are right, there needs to be definition. And over time, as you're grooming this scoring system, you'll get clearer. And the clearer you can be, the better about defining these and revisiting the definitions. Thinking about, is it in our target market? Listing those target markets. You can't be everything to everyone. Well, so the target market is key. Depending on what you're selling, certainly capacity and ability for you to serve could be real. I mean, I've been part of organizations where we've scaled too early. I've been part of organizations where we weren't scaling fast enough, so understanding, capacity and what you can service and how you can service it, that'll set your company up and the customer on the other end for delight or demise, pretty quickly. And then there's other elements that matter to your business. If you are, selling a software platform and there's a new strategic feature that you just launched, maybe you want to tag that in the scoring system because you really want to get a higher degree of installed base using that as quick as possible to optimize it. That could be an example. If you're at an engineering services company, maybe there's an upskilling opportunity that your engineers really want to lean into, tag that. So there is nuance that needs to marry back to your business, your product market fit, so you can be aligned with the right opportunities. And that's the sales process. And then we can talk about the third score in a minute after they become a customer.
Yeah, let's hold for here for a second because I have lots of questions. I want to pull up for everybody just so we're all just friendly reminder of what we're talking about because Bethany just went through a killer list of how to score a prospect through the whole system, from qualifying them as a lead down to a actual potential buyer, depending on all of these attributes. And I think that there is, and she meant, Bethany, you mentioned a bit of automation here from a lead scoring standpoint, versus human manipulation and how those play a role. I want to like be sort of obnoxious about this because I feel like so many companies get, as we like to say, lost in the sauce. I'm feeling that vibe that you mentioned earlier. I'm working with one client right now. They're an enterprise cybersecurity client. And when we started working with them, we've been working with them for a few years. But we got to meet with this chief product officer last year, and it was the first time that we ever had such clarity around leadership priorities. They were so clear. It was like a drumbeat. He had to show up to multiple meetings and say it a couple times before it, like, again, 7 times. You got to hear things 7 times before it sinks in. But it was enterprise, North America, and one of their products. We want to sell this product into enterprise clients in North America. Now, if anything else happens around that, somewhat fine, but my budget for digital marketing needs to go against these 3 things. Ready and go, right? So, wow, did that make our lives so much easier in terms of being able to tell that story. And then I don't know what the lead scoring was on the back end, but we were able to really hone and get after it. So thank you to that client. And I would totally encourage you all, to show up every once in a while, just as a CMO, CPO, show up to your vendors, be very clear. This is what we're trying to make happen here. I found that really helpful, Bethany, but that is really unusual for us to hear that level of clarity down to our level, right? We're a very small piece of the pie. We're digital ads and SEO, right? So very, very small piece of like the full ecosystem of an enterprise Titanic trying to move through the ocean here and pick up revenue. From your standpoint, is that level of clarity, is that drumbeat really what should be happening? Is it happening? Why isn't it happening? Tell me more around, you were very clear around these attributes. And so like, how much do we tie these attributes to those leadership priorities?
Well, they have to be tied. It is not optional for them to be fractured, and it needs to come from leadership. This isn't a groundswell grassroots initiative. That would be, a great attempt, but not very fruitful in driving results. So it has to come from leadership. I've been in businesses where, the extreme clarity on who your target buyers were didn't necessarily require a bunch of scoring. If I was managing the cable companies in the United States, most people can probably, even if they don't live in a market where Comcast sells or Spectrum Mobile, they could do a quick internet search and find, the 7 or 8 cable companies that service the United States of America. So, however, and then you may have a team just thinking about one really large behemoth key account or enterprise. I will still caution you, though, that team has finite capacity to capitalize on the maximum amount of P&L outcomes as possible. So even in those environments, there was some different vocabulary around this qualification prioritization. It might look like a deal review. That's usually what it would be called, because you would have these large key account teams, and make no mistake, they understand as an organization, because there's finite investment to spend on pulsing demand in different key accounts. Verizon versus Comcast, pick a big behemoth organization. And there was a macro prioritization at, different roles in different companies, but at that top line revenue leader for that division or that market, he or she was meeting cross-functionally with those key account P&L owners, with finance in the room, with legal usually in the room. And they were absolutely doing a more financial analysis view. They had tons of clarity about what success looked like. They weren't necessarily having the teams ingest into a pipeline process like I'm describing with a CRM, where scores are being tabulated and communicating out in a dashboard, because the business had a different topography, but the same concept was being applied.
Got to ladder up to it, though.
Correct.
We all got to work towards the same thing. I think that's so incredibly helpful. And I don't know that it's done enough, especially when you have teams that are trying to all work for different things and trying to get different things done. But I just found that so helpful. And I find the scoring system that you're talking about really simple and helpful too, especially from the financial piece. I don't know that we always look at desirability to pay and cash on hand. Like, I guess the question becomes, Bethany, the quality over quantity piece. Like, when marketing is being screamed at to deliver more leads, at what cost?
Yeah, I mean, this is a communication framework to be able to describe what good looks like. Yeah, we've all been in that confusing meeting where, the president of a division or the leader of a division is, do better, do more, good. I mean, they're using these generic, what do you mean? I want to do better and good and excellent. But yeah, so, being able to pull up a report and say, the 25 qualification clients that are in our qualification pipeline right now, 75% of them are startups. Their ability to pay is attributed very low. Let's look at why. What are those keywords that we're buying? Why are we fishing in those ponds? It allows you an ability to engage with marketing with specificity. It doesn't mean that it solves the problem. These are frameworks. These are tools to add efficiency and help optimize decision-making. They aren't the solution. They're tools, because people run business, not frameworks.
My last question for you, Bethany. I'm so sorry. We're up to the wire here. I might have to have you back on. Or my plan, y'all. I'm having all this. You may have noticed a pattern, if you will, that there's CROs joining my podcast because they are a missing piece to the marketing puzzle, and I am here for it. And we are going to pull in some of these folks and have a round table. This is definitely a hot topic I could see as a potential of really digging into this. So stay tuned on that. So last question for you, Bethany, is around, you have the human manipulation piece, you have this framework, but you have a mega huge sales team at an enterprise organization. How do you marry these two things together with such intent that you don't have a leakage problem where the wrong leads are falling out or the right leads are falling out and the wrong ones are getting in? And how do you help them from they have their own personal goals that they're being held to, right? So how do you help them see both the value for themselves as well as the company to follow the framework, please?
Yeah, no, certainly there is alignment on everyone involved is trying to, and here's where the magic happens. When you're in a business where the same team follows the client through the entire journey, the team that negotiates the MSA with all those terms, they live with those terms and operate them for years to come. No one is trying to make mistakes, but once you feel that mistake in practice, maybe there's a reason I should have negotiated net 30 payment terms instead of net 60. Because now when I go to get my quarterly commission, it's not looking so hot because there's this big delay here. So, feeling that, certainly that I love people who've worked in that methodology. Now, certainly not every enterprise is organized that way from the sales organization. They call it functional organization. And there's reasons for it, and they make sense. A lot of SaaS companies are organized functionally, where a different team that qualifies or does net new client acquisition hands over to an account manager or client success team. Why? because they're closing off, at times a multi-year subscription. So fracturing a bit of that experience, there's some tolerance for that. If you're in an organization, like I described, where you're, managing a whole portfolio of purpose-built products for a large enterprise that get launched and designed and developed, handing that over to different teams, that's not going to be a good customer experience. So how do you omit this? You have to have it directly tied to your CRM. This isn't a spreadsheet. It has to be in all the reporting. It has to be communicated weekly. It has to be, these go-to-market dashboards. A dashboard could be as simple, Google Studio, Looker Studio. It doesn't have to be some expensive, complex Tableau BI layer, although it could be, depending on the organization. But the key is it has to be transmitted and publicly shared every week. So the sales rep's name or the account executive or the P&L owner, if it's, a big enough division, is next to their list of deals with their prioritization. This isn't just sitting back in a team meeting behind virtual closed doors.
Accountability. Yeah. Your name is against a thing and you got to talk about it pretty much every day. That's going to really help solidify the process and get everybody on board with following it so that they don't keep seeing their name.
And it's not about shame and blame. It's about,
no.
understanding where we are with our, so we can forecast accurately, so we can provide predictability to not just ourselves, but our customers. Making ourselves inefficient doesn't help your customers either. They need lean, mean fighting machines. That's what they're looking for.
And they deserve it. They have tough jobs for sure. We're here to make it better. Let me recap here, Bethany, and then give you the last word here in case we missed anything or double down or correct me if I'm wrong. I love being corrected. I'm here for it. But it sounds like you need to first and foremost make sure you have true product market fit. PMF, know your ideal customer and know how to bring value to them inside and out, because that will bring value back to the customer, your CLV. In terms of how you do that from a scoring standpoint, is you want to make sure that you can do the automation piece first from your leads, easily qualify them against your company priorities. And then the human element comes into play to really understand where they are in the buying cycle and if they need this thing right now and how much energy to essentially give it depending on whether they're ready or not. I simplified the malarkey out of this, Bethany, but I feel like that's sort of the hierarchy of how to get started. Last piece of advice for folks like who maybe had a bad experience with scoring and bailed on it, or maybe they're just trying to get started. Where would you tell them, how would you help them get back on the horse?
The attention and time spent on clarifying and defining what each score means, and no more than 1, 2, or 3 per element. Once you start seeing frameworks where there's so much context that someone's going to stop even reading by the time they get to the 4th variable, they're going to forget what it means. And if it is tied to your company goals, and you're clear about, like you described to this product owner who was so crystal clear, if that's being repeated and that drumbeat is going on, that of course, needs to marry in with your scoring. Remember, this is not the outcome. It is to help make you more efficient in driving the right outcomes. Driving value, I'll end it with driving value throughout this process. That's what you want these people thinking about. And you want them thinking about it on the opportunities that make the most sense for the market, for the company, and for them, because it's their time. They only have so much time in a given week as well. And ultimately, you're honoring your employees when they're clear about what their priorities are.
Clear is kind. Unclear is unkind.
Agree.
Thank you so much, Bethany. Where can people find you?
I am on LinkedIn, so I will drop that if you don't already have that. Certainly find me on LinkedIn. I'm going to put my personal email in there as well. So reach out. I love to connect with people and share ideas and hear what's going on out in the market. Curiosity quotient. Keep learning.
I am going to drop this framework where we'll write a blog post about it, and we'll write up Bethany's sort of high level so you can have the key takeaways, because she dropped in so many key attributes around each aspect. I want to make sure y'all have that sort of simplified as like a one pager so you can take that with you and run with it. I think scoring is really powerful when used properly and not overdone. And so I am here for it. I'm here for it. Thank you so much, Bethany. Before we close out, you are more than a CRO. You're more than a marketer. What new hobbies have you picked up in the last few years since the turn of the world of COVID, being sent into, the isolation piece, or maybe coming out of it and feeling like I can go do this thing that I haven't done in a while?
Yeah.
What do you
I'll
love
tell
to
you,
do in your free time?
one of my big personal goals, and I've started to have some outcomes, is being more involved in person with professional organizations and networking organizations. So I've started to attend more of them. I've met some, incredibly intelligent, smart people doing big things and small things in the world. And that energy and that live dialogue, I'm intentionally spending more time joining business councils and local organizations. And that's something that I'm excited to keep growing and proliferating. Connecting.
Oh,
Yes. Yes.
connection. So key coming out of the pandemic. I love that. What an inspiration. Bethany, I'm so grateful. Thank you again. Thank you to our listeners. If you like this episode, please like, subscribe, and share. This episode was brought to you by MKG Marketing, the digital marketing agency that helps complex brands get found via SEO and digital ads. It's hosted by me, Carrie Gard, CEO and co-founder of MKG Marketing. And if you'd like to be a guest, please visit mkgmarketinginc.com to apply. Bethany, thank you again. So good.
Thank you, Carrie. Have a great rest of your evening.
You too. You too.